And it looks like you'll be recording today's meeting as well.
Is that okay with you?
It's fine with me.
Okay, terrific.
Yeah, just
Thank you, Wes.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, why don't we just introduce ourselves?
Yeah, that
first
sounds
then,
good.
Okay, you want to start?
Robert Chakanaka, I was the president of Monterey Bay Central Labor Council that I've retired, since retired. We first met in Santa Cruz when we were working on some of those things before it shifted over here.
great.
Thank you, Robert. I'm Mark Weller. I work with Californians for Pesticide Reform, which is a statewide group looking to reduce pesticide harms throughout the state. And our local branch here is Safe Ag, Safe Schools. That branch is led by Yaneli Martinez, who is the organizer. She sends her regrets. She's with her ailing husband on family medical leave today, but she wanted to say hi.
Yeah,
She
thank
wanted
you. I
to-
appreciate that. And we wish you all the best for quick recovery.
Thank you.
Dr. Ann Lopez, I'm the Executive Director of Center for Farm Worker Families.
Olga Reina with United Farm Workers here in Monterey County, and also with Building Healthy Communities.
Hi, I'm Sandra. I am a community member, mainly in South County, and I registered nurse. I work at a local hospital here, and just a few months ago, I used to be vice president of the Monterey County Central Labor Council.
Alberto Martinez, I'm Sandra's husband. I'm a respiratory therapist. Live down in South County and I'm a concerned citizen.
Good afternoon, Victor Caraves, any political organizer for Monterey Bay Central Council.
Francisco Rodriguez, I'm a retired teacher and secretary treasurer with the Monterey Bay Central Labor Council.
Edith Navarro, public health nurse, council member of California Nurses for Environmental Health and Justice, as well as a current president of the National Association of Nurses for the San Francisco Bay Area.
I'm Joshua Ezekiel, a retired teacher here in Salinas and former executive board member of the Monterey Bay Central Labor Council and member of California Teachers Association, retired.
Hi, I'm Karen Cameron. I'm a retired teacher also. I'm now working with CSUMB as a clinical coach, so I go in and supervise 9 student teachers in different schools throughout the districts. And a citizen of Salinas who's very concerned about a lot of the agriculture here.
My name is Rich Ordonez. I'm the Assistant Ag Commissioner for the County of Monterey Agricultural Commissioner's Office.
My name is Ken Allen. I'm a Chief Deputy Ag Commissioner with the Monterey County Commissioner.
And Juan Hidalgo, I'm the Monterey County Commissioner, so welcome. Thanks for taking the time to meet with us. And again, I apologize for the confusion on the address. So make sure that we keep a closer eye on making sure that the information is correct for all of you next time. No worries.
So, Commissioner, again, I apologize. This was going to be Yaneli, but I'm a poor substitute. But I am here in her place to follow up on some of the correspondence that we've attempted to have with the Monterey County Ag Commissioner's Office. You know, just to be, I mean, when our group sent the letters and when we finally got a response, and that response was, and I'm quoting here, Commissioner Hidalgo says, I wanted to reach out to let you know that my office is in receipt of the letters sent by your group over the past several weeks. I have read the letters and appreciate you taking the time to correspond with my office. And that was it. And when we took that response back to our membership, many of whom are here, but certainly not all, it was just like, what? Because this wasn't what we're used to from our interactions with you in Santa Cruz, and it appeared sarcastic. We didn't know what to make of it. So we said, look, let's just meet him in person, because this is not the Juan Hidalgo that we've come to know.
Sure. Yeah, and you know, it's that my response was not meant to be sarcastic.
Okay.
Certainly there's no tone in email at all, right? And I think that, we have had communications in the past, and some of the issues that you raised in your correspondence to me are issues that we have discussed in the past as well. So it's in no way trying to ignore any of your concerns. And yeah, again, my response was not meant to be sarcastic in any way. It was just an acknowledgement on receipt of your correspondence. And yes, my response was delayed. So, I'll try to improve on that to make sure that when I get your correspondence that, there's that acknowledgement that I did receive that correspondence from your group.
Well, can I just add something? I didn't take, obviously you're right, we can't really, the tone and email communication, but they does allow the optics, it allows for interpretation of optics. And to me, I didn't take it as sarcastic, I took it more as dismissive, because the 4 letters, from our point of view, bring a lot of concerning issues based on research that are important and impact the community. And essentially, you said, I got your letter, thank you, I have it. And so I'm thinking, well, where's the follow-up? Hey, you know what, let's meet. Hey, you know what, something. It was just, to me, I took it as more as dismissive, because there was no additional material that indicated that, hey, it's making me think, let's follow up on this. So that's my point of view, how it was acknowledged.
Yeah, no, thank you, I appreciate that. Certainly, in no way am I being dismissive. I do appreciate correspondence, the information, letting me know about what your concerns are. Like I said, this had been ongoing issues for a while, from the time I was in Santa Cruz to the time I came here to Monterey County. So I think in our meetings previously to discuss similar matters, we're having these conversations because in no way am I being dismissive, right? I mean, some of these things do take some time to figure out what are some next steps, and is there a next step to be able to be taken, right? So in no way am I being dismissive. I think that's why we're here today as well,
Yes.
right? To be able to have the conversation.
So,
Okay, right, so that would be great if we can talk about next steps with some of these issues. I think that's really why we do want to be here, so we appreciate that. And, we do want to, we're, of course, the organization I represent is in a number of places in the state, and we've struggled a bit with some ag commissioners because their frequent response to any request is, I can't, or I can't legally. And we just, want to kind of start this meeting by saying that's not our understanding, and that's actually not been our relationship with you either, Commissioner Hidalgo, because, we know that ag commissioners by the law can restrict pesticide use that, and this is a quote from the Food and Agricultural Code, will present an undue hazard when used under local conditions. And we believe there are a number of pesticides that we've been trying to communicate with you about that certainly meet the undue hazard, that they are either excessive or disproportionate or both standard. So we're hoping that we can talk about next steps today. That would be great. And so
Yeah,
I didn't want to do all the talking. So
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I mean, we have to be clear that there are limitations on what I am able to do. There's also a process here in California for pesticide evaluation, and I think you all know, DPR in California has the most regulatory pesticide system in the nation. So I think that's important to continue to bring up and acknowledge, right? And that we're way ahead of any other state when it comes to pesticide regulation in the state. So, but I'm happy to hear and certainly listen to your concerns and continue to have conversations on some of the pesticides that are a concern to all of you, to everybody really, and what's in place and what might be able to be done, and what the state has in plans, which I'm sure you're familiar with the movement that DPR has in changing the way pesticides are used here in California with to some of their pesticide review processes, and that inclusion of looking at more alternatives that are safer. So there's a lot in the works, right? So this is something that's gonna be a step at a time. but it looks like the state appears to be moving in that direction, but I'll be happy to hear from you.
So in our letter on the 22nd of August 2023, is there anything you can enlighten us on that is in there because you never responded to? Is there something you can tell us today about?
And that was the one on
That's the one on
138?
DCPA, Dacthal.
Dacthal.
Which is really, you know, even, I mean, the US EPA says it's really bad stuff. And when they say that, and they're not always friendly to lower causes, but when they say that, we're hoping that you would say, yeah, this is, and I'm going to do something about it. We ask 48-hour intended requirement for growers to give us before the application point. 1 mile buffer zone around schools, residents, field crews, and other sensitive sites, aka even your office. And then a 30-day field reentry interval.
Yeah, so I think first of all, you know, Dacthal, I think it's important to understand how that material is utilized. I'm not sure if you know how it's used. It's a pre-emergent herbicide. The way it's used is a little bit different than some other pesticide applications. It's what is called a banded application, so it's being applied as the crop is being planted, right? And it's primarily used on cole crops, things like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, right? Yes. And so I did read your letter. I read the EPA press releases on that product. But coming back to how the material is utilized, it's a one-time application while the crop is being planted. And the concerns about the reentry and, you know, the EPA making the comments about potentially a 30-day reentry to protect app workers.
Right.
In looking how that material is used in the county, once it is applied, besides irrigation activities, there's no other activity that happens on those fields or farm worker reentry for 45 days on those commodities. So I think that's important to understand. The only activity that happens is the day after the application, the irrigators, there might be a team of 3 or 6 irrigators that put the pipe out, and that's a limited contact activity, so they're just handling the pipes, moving in, walking in the furrows where the application didn't take place to set up the pipe so that they can turn on the water to irrigate for the next several weeks. No ag worker enters those fields after, for at least 45 days.
So
And that's a practice that the industry has based on the commodity and the fact that that product is effective in controlling the weeds. So one of the things that it does is that it actually reduces the amount of pesticide use because then growers don't have to go back in there and apply other herbicides throughout the growing cycle of the crop. So I think it's important to understand like how that product is being used here in Monterey County. And I do recognize that EPA did put out the press release. In fact, there was an update on Monday. I don't know if you saw it, right? So they lifted the suspension so the material can continue to be used. It sounds like EPA is gonna be looking at, they're still have some concerns about the impacts to workers, right? So it looks like they're gonna be looking at other measures to be able to mitigate or address some of the concerns that they have, and that was something that was put out on the press release that came out on Monday. So at this point, you know, they have the science, they have the data, so I think they're gonna be reviewing the data that they got from the manufacturer and review that and figure out, you know, what needs to happen next, right? So it's gonna be up to EPA at this point to figure out, because they're the scientists, right? They're the ones reviewing the studies, figuring out, trying to figure out what are the impacts to agricultural workers. And, you know, part of the press release talked about whether they should move to cancel the product or suspend the product again from use, right? But potentially also there was some mention about them placing some additional protective measures for agricultural workers. Now that they didn't mention what that might be at this point, but certainly any regulatory requirement that EPA places on the product, we will be sure to make sure that our growers are following those requirements.
So you'll enforce those?
Absolutely. So if it's a regulatory requirement as part of the label,
so if there's a 45 day,
sure.
then you could put a 30-day in. You could say, I'm going to mandate a 30-day in.
I don't have the ability to change EPA's labels. Those are
No, you
federal
wouldn't change the
labels.
labels. I'm not talking about changing labels. You would put into restriction of the 30-day reentry.
I cannot, that is not a restricted material to begin with, so I cannot make those type of conditions. I cannot condition reentry based on
What about buffer zones? around schools.
There's not enough data. I'm relying on EPA to put out the data because they have the science, they're reviewing the study. So whatever they determine is appropriate, that is going to be protective of community members, that is what I am going to follow. So if they say this is the additional restriction on the label, then we will be sure that our growers understand that those requirements are something that they're going to need to implement. But the one thing I wanted to mention, and the reason why I mentioned how the material is used, I get the concern about the reentry. I think EPA made that mention about maybe even 30 days might not be enough in one of their press releases. They had limited information at the time, so they're also looking at some additional data, right? So I think that it's going to be important to understand what the final decision is from EPA, but moreover, to address some of the concerns that you're bringing forward, the fact that the way the material is used in this county and the fact that there's already limitations on when workers are entering those fields to perform the majority of agricultural practices, the risk is being mitigated to some extent,
I'm
right?
also concerned about buffer zones around, particularly around schools. That's really an issue that needs to be taken into account.
And for that, you can look at the science from University of California, Berkeley, the Chamaco studies with the bracelets where the girls were being exposed to Dacthal without entering the fields at all. They were just in their neighborhoods.
Right.
Yeah, and
That's a
so,
big concern.
I mean, you're aware that there is some restrictions about pesticide use around schools, right? And I think for the most part, certain applications are allowed within a quarter of a mile of schools because it all depends on the application method, right? If it's a soil fumigant, those applications are not allowed to happen until at least 36 hours. You know, there has to be a 36-hour lapse from the time the application completed to the time school starts. So basically what that means for when school is in session, those fumigant applications can only happen on Saturdays. That's the only day. There's other applications that may be restricted, you know, but if a grower is doing an application such as a drench on a nursery, those applications are not prohibited necessarily. However, my point around that is that, you know, the majority of growers are pretty conscious and respectful, regardless of the material that they intend to apply, not to do those applications when schools are in session. And I can oversee our pesticide programs. I mean, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, but generally growers that farm around schools, regardless of the regulations in place, they're pretty conscious about when they do those applications.
So are we conscious of the fact that most school districts are running Saturday school programs at this point because of the pandemic and remediation? And I'd just like to ask a follow-up question about Dacthal. Is it the same as TLO 13D?
No.
No.
Okay, then I'm
Yeah.
asking about TLO 13D. But you asked,
But
you
to your
mentioned,
question, we are generally aware of the schools and we try to work with the school districts. If they have a Saturday schedule they can give us, that's great to know.
Well,
I
the middle
think
schools and the
that,
high schools all have programs that work on Saturdays.
Okay.
A lot of activities around sports,
yeah.
and extracurricular, and it's all on Saturday.
Yeah, and it'd be great to know those schedules, but moreover, you know, as part of the school requirements and regulations, growers have to supply a notification to the schools on an annual basis, right? Of all the materials that they may potentially use within a quarter of a mile of the schools. And part of the intent of the regulation was to increase communications between growers and schools as well, right? So I think, you know, if schools have a certain schedule, they have the grower information, and that would be an extra step that schools can take to be able to communicate with growers that information as well.
But, I mean, one of our main concerns about Dacthal is something you said earlier, Commissioner, and that is it's not a restricted pesticide.
Right.
So you can't even intervene, you know, to talk to the grower and say, hey, don't use that stuff on the day when they're having something on Saturday or something like that. But our concern isn't that the growers are doing anything wrong. You know, they're not. You know, they may very well be following the label to the letter. The problem is, according to the US EPA, the label, current allowed uses on the label, allows for 1,500 times above the level that's considered safe by the US EPA for something that contributes to low birth weight, impaired brain development, decreased IQ, and impaired motor skills observed later in life, and that's from the US EPA. So we know this is happening. We know, as Josh pointed out, that our kids are exposed to this stuff because it was on the bracelets, and over half of them and this was during a year when there was less Dacthal used than there was in 2021, the last year for which we have data. So we're saying that these local conditions are extraordinary. They're half of all Dacthal use in the state is used in Monterey County. Half of it. So that's why we're saying, look, this is presenting an undue hazard. It's disproportionate. It's excessive. And so you can, we would argue, do something like requiring the NOI so that you can take action. Yeah, and give us more, and get a notice, and then, you know, I hope, and I don't doubt, that there is a practice of 45-hour reentry period, but it's not against the law to go in after 12 hours now, and we think it should be. So we think that, since it won't apparently cause any problems, if we have at least a 30-day reentry, or make it 45, that'd be great. There are things you can do, and that's why because it's so awful here, in particular.
And I just wanted to add that, so, you know, one of the things that you said no to one of the requests was because it's not a restricted material, kind of saying, you know, I can't mess with it because it's not on some kind of list. But my understanding from these letters is that you have, like he's saying, because the definition, how it impacts locally, how it's used locally, pesticides, you know, is undue, hazard, and disproportionate. If you miss that definition, then you have I would say you're not doing nothing against the law by acting your authority as an Ag Commissioner to safeguard the public by acting certain things that we're asking. So I think the fact that it's restricted should not limit you, according to the definition, to act on ways to protect the public. And I appreciate your explanation why the third-day field reentry, you know, the way it's being used. But there's other factors that are bringing here, including the 1 mile buffer, the 48 notice, that definitely, you know, you can implement. So I'm curious, I guess, what is your definition or criteria for when you think, okay, despite a chemical not being unrestricted, I can do something about it? What criteria do you use to act on something that is not unrestricted? Because I want to understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, generally hard science helps. So with EPA making you know, the recommendations that they're making right now, they're not supported by any science. They're still reviewing the studies that were submitted by the manufacturer, right? And so a lot of our regulations are based on science, you know, and you had mentioned 1,3-D. So 1,3-D is highly regulated here in California, and all of those restrictions come because there's been scientific studies, right? A lot of the pesticide registration process is based on studies looking at impacts to the environment, human health, and so the labels are written to be able to address those concerns, right? What EPA is saying is that they think that is a risk. They haven't come out and said, we're absolutely sure there's a risk. You know, they need to come out and if it's a risk, EPA is going to have to take some action, right? They need to say, we're absolutely sure that this is the risk to agricultural workers, and therefore we're implementing these measures into play. And they haven't done that and said that just yet. They might, according to the press release that they put out on Monday. But, you know, making decisions, I don't have a scientific team. We don't do what DPR does with health hazard assessment necessarily, you know, where they look at studies and they look at all kinds of other data. So we rely on the state to give us that information. And many times, you know, when it comes to regulations, and you can take the 1,3-D, a lot of the regulations that we follow locally come from DPR. which are based on some of the work that they have done on scientific studies.
So I'm hearing that your criteria is to follow EPA and or hard science, because EPA follows hard science. But as you know, if you know science, and I come from a science field, that it's going to take time, especially when you're dealing with EPA and bureaucracy. Meanwhile, in my perception is that our community members are potentially being exposed. And so because it takes time and to reach just the right hard science data that you need, that has been vetted and everything else, and it takes time, the science calls for the precautionary principle, which is if you do it, whatever you have, you go for the least amount of interventions that's going to cause the least harm. So definitely you can adjust that criteria. I'm waiting for hard science, but meanwhile, do I have enough evidence to use the precautionary principle? It is through your Purdue as the protecting entity of pesticides for public that you can act on that. So I'm saying there should be some gateway. I don't expect that every single thing that we're asking for you to do, that you do, but definitely there's some room for you to say, okay, I don't have enough data, but precautionary principle and your knowledge basis is, until I get from EPA, it doesn't to enact this and this and that. I'm just pointing for you to kind of think about it in the background as we continue moving forward.
No, thank you, I appreciate that.
There is the science of the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment to balance things.
Yeah,
But
Karen, that's actually a perfect transition to the next one. I just want to make sure we finish up on Dacthal. You're going right in perfect direction here. Are you not willing to take action on Dacthal locally?
Yeah, not at this point. I want to wait for EPA. I want to wait for DPR and see what science, as they review the studies, to see if there's any additional regulations that they want to implement, any additional mitigations that can be regulated. I think the other thing that I'm going to mention is that we have an air monitoring program, and Dacthal is one of the things that is part of our air monitoring program, right? And yes, you're right, there has been some trace detections, but there has been nothing that has been above any health screening levels.
Motion to take it?
So I mean, it's not like the state is ignoring the concerns around certain pesticide products, including Dacthal, right? There's a reason why Dacthal was added to the air monitoring program, and it's a material that they continue to collect information on to see if there's any additional need to take any additional actions. And I'm sure EPA's information and review of the product potentially will result in some change here in California at some point.
Okay, but the way we read the US EPA report was, hey, it's going to take a long time for us to get through the bureaucracy. Meanwhile, this stuff is really much worse than we thought. So they're kind of giving us a warning, kind of giving us a heads up so we can take action. So we're disappointed that you're not. Could you at least maybe distribute the US EPA, I would call it a warning, to the growers who plan to use it? We gave you a long list of growers just who plan to use Dacthal within a quarter mile of, 67 schools or 65 schools.
I can share that information with growers to bring it to their attention.
Okay, thank you. And they can decide with an informed background. Okay, now we're going to get to what Karen was talking about, which was, you mentioned hard science, and indeed, our group believes that the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment conducts what we would call hard science. Mm-hmm. And they're...
Along with DPR, they also have their own team on.
They do. They have a team as well. And it's all within the same agency of California Environmental Protection Agency, in the same building. And in 2022 now, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment gave us their safe harbor level, their lifetime cancer risk exposure level for 1,3-D. And that was 3.7 micrograms per day on average. And that is the equivalent of breathing in air that's concentrated with 0.04 parts per billion of 1,3-D on a daily average. Some days might be more, many days might be less. And we, when we heard that, we were very concerned for our communities, our children. There is, as you know, and you mentioned it earlier, an air monitor. At Ohlone Elementary School, we've also had air monitors at the Salinas Airport and down in Chular. I think before you were with us.
Yeah.
Yes, I know before you were with us.
Yeah.
And at every one, because you record this over time, the levels of 1,3-D have been far above, more than twice, what the hard science of the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment has said. So we're concerned about that. And Francisco, did you want to add some more to that? Because Francisco's been involved in this concern over fumigants for more than a decade now, I know, because you were in some of the initial negotiations over the first notification system for schools, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, so we've been, as you know, we've been, trying to get notices posted. We've had some successes with that. We've been able to work with a number of schools that, inform their staff, and some of the staff pass on to the families. And as you know, not always as successfully as we would like it to be. But we wanna really make sure that when there are applications, that the application is inspected, not just on itself, but also holistically, meaning how many other people are applying at the same time within that same area, to make sure that the risks are reduced. And, I know some of our families around the schools, the community, not just within the school, but homes around the area also have concerns. At one point, I know, for example, in Santa Cruz County, around schools, we would get notices, flyers posted, dropped on doors, that kind of thing. And so is there anything that we can do, or you can help to get that same type of activity into Monterey County, where...
So, Francisco, so you're referring to notifications around schools?
Yes.
For fumigants?
Yes.
Because, we have a notification program here that has been in place for schools in Pajaro, and I think we have 13 schools in that North Monterey County area. It's not a pilot anymore, but it's been ongoing for like 6 years now.
Yeah, since 20.
So any community member can sign up to get emails. We put that information when the fumigation is taking place within a quarter of a mile of the schools.
Sorry, excuse the interruption, Commissioner, but Francisco was actually in on the negotiations that produced those. I understand it was 10 schools, 7 in North Monterey County, and then
I think it's
3.
I think it's 13, but some of the schools don't actually receive any notices because of their locations.
Because they're not, okay. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to, I know we have limited time, so apologies.
So yes, we wanted to, we initially started with 3 schools in Monterey County. And so our hope is that we can expand it to more schools. I was not aware that there were 13 altogether now.
It might be county, some schools have like multiple schools within one location here.
Okay. But if, whatever we can do with that, I know as well that sometimes the notices don't specify where the fumigation would take place, so a little more specification as to where the fumigation will take place.
Yeah, I think in our program it doesn't it?
Well, we provide the map and then recommendation and then notice of intent, and that's posted on the website, or there's a link for that. So that's the information that we provide. Yeah. So it does show a map where the application is going to take place and the date.
And then, do you work directly with the schools and the administration to disseminate the information, or how does that?
The schools themselves actually, some sign up for those notifications, so they can receive those as well.
So So the
And then it would be up to them to decide how they want to distribute that.
Yeah, but any community member can actually sign up to
Yes.
get those notifications. Yeah, and it's the Farming Safely Near Schools website. It's in both English and Spanish, and anybody can sign up to get, through email to get that information. But, you know, that system, you know, it's going to be replaced eventually because, you know, the state is working on their statewide notification system. I mean, that's going to be a lot more inclusive than what we're able to do with what we currently have. So there's going to be different ways in which people can receive that information about pesticide, restricted materials, basically anywhere. It's not just going to be limited to proximity to school. So that's going to be a much broader dissemination of information for any member of the public that wants to know more about what's going on. And so we're waiting to see when EPA is going to eventually launch that system.
Okay. And are you aware of when exactly, what, any?
I don't know. I think
Okay.
2024 was the target that they had in mind. I know they, you know, they did some pilots going back a couple of years when I was at Santa Cruz. I ran one of the pilots, right, just to get feedback from the community to help them shape the system to be able to provide information that would be helpful to community members. And then they were running a beta on their system in Monterey County late last year. But I'm not sure what that date might be for them in releasing that system publicly.
Can I ask, have you made any changes to your system in terms of citizens being able to report on the weekend? And also, I'm just curious if maybe you could give further accountability. I'm the one who went through Acme Car Wash and saw a sign for T-Loan 1-3D near a small plant there. And I reported it to your office, but it just came back with an answer that it contacted the manager. They didn't really know why it was there, and suddenly the sign was removed. And so being such a serious chemical and your need for transparency with the community, I'm just wondering if you could address how that might happen, that someone would get a sign like that. Would they take it from somewhere else, or what do you think happened?
Yeah, I can answer that. I was involved with that investigation. We couldn't really figure it out. Speculation would be, because it was a car wash, there could have easily been a pest control advisor who came to clean out their vehicle, moved the sign out of the way, cleaned the vehicle, and didn't put it back in their truck. That's the simplest explanation. Clearly, there was no application of toll, so that's the number one thing we are sure. No one did toll.
So back to my original question, have you made any changes that the public can report on the weekend, or would we still be referred to 911 if we smelled a drift?
Yeah, no, I think our office did make a change going on like a couple of years now, maybe more. We have this agricultural worker hotline. Now the goal of that hotline is, you know, we do get concerns from our ag worker community, so the goal of having that hotline was to be able to address any concerns that they may have. It is posted on our website, and it's a hotline that is answered. We have a team member that has a cell phone 24 hours a day, and you know, they'll respond. You know, if it's in the middle of the night, I'm hoping people could leave a message and they'll get back to them, you know, as soon as possible. But that was the idea, to have a number that would be accessible to community members even on the weekends after hours. So that's one of the changes that the office has implemented in the last couple of years, and we're working on disseminating some more of that information to our agricultural worker community. So we'll be working with one of our groups to help disseminate more information about accessibility, and that telephone number is available for them to be able to reach out to us if they have any concerns or questions about pesticides.
And just to quickly follow up on that, it is important if you are a community member and you do smell an odor to contact 911. They're first responders. We are not first responders. We can help the first responders with identifying the source of that, but they're the trained professionals that you want to contact if there's the health risk. So yes, call 911. They're supposed to contact our office. It doesn't always happen that way. But yeah, they're the first responders. We are the resources to help them understand what that source of that odor could.
Yeah, especially in situations if you're having some issues and you suspect it's a pesticide that's creating some problems for you, whether it be breathing problems or something else, right? I mean, you definitely want to contact, health professionals. But, for issues where you have a concern about something that you saw, maybe you thought that somebody drifted on workers or drifted on your car as you were driving by a field, those are the situations where those are more not necessarily emergencies, but you can let us know and we can investigate and try to figure out what happened in those situations.
Just any feedback on that. So going back to the 911, police officers, they're trained, but they're trained on the law enforcement side. So as if I call for a 911 with a 5150, necessarily they're not trained to take care of somebody who is having a breakdown, behavioral health issue. Same thing has happened with the pesticide. So you guys are the professionals. So we can't really throw everything to 911.
Well, 911 is fire departments and paramedics. And that's when I say the first responder, those are the trained professionals who are going to respond, in my experience, to an odor complaint. It's not police officers, it's the fire department and the trained professionals. So that's what I'm talking about.
And moreover, the point of the 911 is, if somebody's having some health problems, we would not be able to assist them with that, right? Like, what we would do is try to get information about what happened, what did you see, who was it, right? So we want to make sure that if people are experiencing some health problems, please take care of yourself first, call 911 if you need to, and certainly call us once you feel better, take care of yourself first, and then call us and we'll investigate.
But we are concerned
I'm sorry. So we're running a bit out of time, and I know we have two major topics to address. I also want to make sure Commissioner Hidalgo and team that you knew that Ellie Atalano and Juan Moran are here. They came in a little bit late, but you want to introduce yourself, please?
Juan Manuel Moran, para la Unión de Campesinos.
Thank you. And Ellie?
Yeah, and I'm Ellie. I'm part of El Campesino, and I'm a mother to some students, and I have a friend who lives right next to Ohlone, who is affected by pesticides even when the school's out, because she lives right next to Ohlone. So I think that our main goal in this conversation is to kind of get you to be a little bit more accountable for what it is that you do and push you to want to do more. Because from what I'm hearing since I walked in, you really limit yourself based on your job. You really limit yourself based on the EPA when we have so much more science to back it up. You spoke a lot about scientific data. We're providing you with that data. But I want to definitely ask you to pursue going above and beyond your job, not setting those limitations for yourself, because pesticides will harm you just as much as they'll harm me. They don't care about bureaucracy or anything else like that. And the science is there from multiple sources. And the EPA deals with bureaucracy. At that time, it's going to slowly kill us all. Not just us on this side of the table, but you as well. So I'm here to ask you to please go above and beyond what your role is, because if we all limit ourselves to what our roles are, there's never going to be any progression in any sort of way.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate those comments. I think, over the years, meeting with Mark and some of team members while I was in Santa Cruz, I mean, some progress has been made, right? Whether it be locally, and I did some things in Santa Cruz, or whether it be at the state level, right? Like the conversations here today, I know it feels like it takes a long time to get to where you wanna go with some of your concerns. I completely get that, I appreciate it, but these things do take time. But something is happening, right? And we can go back and look at some of the changes in our regulatory pesticide programs over the last 5 years, right? And some of that change has come out because of this type of conversations and your concerns, right? So don't feel that you're not being listened to. You are, but yeah, it is something that it's a process, unfortunately, that does take some time depending on the issue. And I mean, we can point to several different things that have occurred in the last few years. Community concerns, the pesticide school regulation, that came about because of community concerns, right? And so that was a regulation that was put in place, and we're making sure that our growers follow those requirements and that our growers are respectful of those requirements. 1,3-D, which has been an ongoing concern for community members, right? Over the last couple of years, there's been some changes in the use of 1,3-D, right? There's some new regulations that were put in place this year, right? But all of that has come about because of this conversation.
I'm sorry,
right?
I don't mean to cut you off, it's just that we're running so short on time. We know the history, a lot of us have been there working through that history. I think based on that history and knowing the many years of work that it's taken us to get the very little that we have, we are confident that if you were to work with us actively, instead of putting any barriers or working against us in any sort of way, we together, working together, would be able to accomplish a lot more, a lot quicker. And that's what we're asking for you to do. To go above and beyond, work with us, not against us. When we reach those barriers, work with us to break down those barriers as opposed to upholding them. So I'm aware of the history. Everybody here is very aware of the history and the data. Just based on time, sorry to cut you off, we're asking you to do more moving forward so that we can
Sure.
move
No,
forward.
thank you. I appreciate that, and I think, again, I'm willing to listen to your concerns, and I appreciate those concerns. I take them seriously, but some credit has to be given. I mean, these things take some time. There are things that have been done here in Monterey County. That notification system that is in place right now, it came out of similar conversations, right? The creation of a phone number and a phone line that's accessible to agricultural workers 24 hours a day, it came out of concerns from community members, right? So it's not like we're not going above and beyond, and I think everybody may have a different idea of what that means for what I do and what my staff does in our programs, but it's not that we're not listening to you. We are, and when we're able to make some change, I'm happy to do so, but there are some limitations as well. And I know that doesn't answer your question. It probably doesn't, my comments probably don't make you feel any better. But I'm just saying there has been some change over the years, and it's happening. But to be able to do, create significant change to the extent that you're proposing with some of your concerns does take some time. And we need to work with our state agencies as well on that, because they need a lot of our efforts too.
And Dr. Ann Lopez wants to make some comments on what we argue is more hard science. In fact, it's the gold standard for pesticide science over the years, the longitudinal 25-year Chamaco study regarding organophosphate pesticides.
Yes, and before I do that, I would like to mention that no matter what we've accomplished, the average life expectancy of a farm worker is still 49 to 51 years. And that really hasn't changed. That's from the UFW, by the way. And then the other thing is for people like me who are in the community, meeting with families and children, I see children dying of cancer regularly. And I frankly am sick and tired of that. Whatever we're doing is not working, because these children, just last week, in the middle of Santa Cruz, or in the middle of Watsonville, we had people carrying signs of a 14-year-old who had died of neuroblastoma, asking for handouts for the funeral for this kid. And a month before that, a 13-year-old child of a farm worker dead from bone cancer, brain cancer, leukemia, learning disabilities, ADHD. These are children, for God's sakes. How can we do this to children? I don't think there's any amount of wealth generation that can justify the suffering that I have seen in these families who lose children, and the suffering of the children themselves. What are we going to do about this disparity? I mean, I can hear all of this that we're trying to move there and stuff, but this is a medical emergency now. It's happening right now. And if this were happening in some other community, an all-white community, I'm sure that there would be, well, like the COVID thing. Suddenly there's a COVID pandemic, there's vaccines being made, etc. But because they're children of farm workers, somehow they don't matter. And that has to change. I think it's dehumanized and disgraceful. We must, and the science is there, just like we were saying. There's more than enough science to show that these chemicals are disastrous for human beings and exposure. Can't we do something better to save these children? I mean, it literally destroys my soul to visit these families and see them suffer, watching their children die, or them dying themselves, or a relative. There's got to be another way. This isn't working, whatever we're doing. I just had to say that, sorry.
And to echo Dr. Lopez's concern, right, as a nurse, right, like, we can work at our own individual place, whether it's a hospital and do our 9 to 5, whatever it is. But when it gets to the point where we're constantly seeing this, right, and I know that you're trying your best, and I commend you for the milestones that have been accomplished, right? But at the end of the day, I mean, it's so outrageous, right? When you're at a hospital bedside and you keep seeing, where are these kids coming from? And if it's here, if it's in this area, why are our children any less, right? I don't know if you have grandkids, if you have children yourselves, but there's just something so inhumane about that, right? And just looking at healthcare costs, at going to all these appointments, like, that's just so unfair for a lot of our families that it's just, I mean, and I appreciate that you mentioned the science and that we're looking at the data, right? Because that is important. But when things come out like, researchers at UCLA Fielding School of Public Health identified 13 pesticides linked to childhood cancers. If a pregnant mother lived within 2.5 miles of an application, right? And then here in Monterey County, 9 out of 10 pounds of these pesticides are concentrated, again, in our communities. I mean, you're Latino, a lot of us are Latino. And so just to continue to see that disparity, we just have to do more, right? And so our asks are obviously to keep pushing. You do have power. You do have authority that when things are not working well, like, you can push back, right? Like, we don't need to wait for the EPA because it's going to take forever, and we don't have time. Just, I don't know what to say. Like, it's children.
Well, I just want to add, segueing to her talking about this UCLA, because it's one of the ones that we were going to mention. One of the three things that we're asking about it, 2 of them do not involve any financial strain. You already have a process in place. It's calling for transparency, so the people I live 10 feet away from the fields, and I look over my fence and I see fields way to the foothills. And I have an immunocompromised daughter who the people in the healthcare know that if you're immunocompromised, you're at higher risk of getting certain type of cancers. She's gonna be having a baby. My grandkids are at risk. And regardless, the others are Latino, but it's just a human being. And I'm thinking to myself, what is being sprayed there, right? And all I need is transparency. And if notice of intent is one that we're asking for girls, that are not on the restricted list. That's one of the requests from there. Another was a web post, notice of intent, in real time when these 13 pesticides are being, because it will help me. Yeah, it may not be a big deal, maybe not to you guys that live in a central city, far from me. Hey, you know what? They're gonna spray. Hey, you know what? Let me close the doors for a little bit. I live downwind, so I need to know exactly the location because it helps me to mitigate the risk. And so that's a personal, I hate to use a personal example, but it does matter, transparency. It is impactful, and you have the power. You're saying data, we're giving you data, but what I see, it's not personal, attack. I see a lack of will for whatever reason. And in this case, I'm trying to understand, this too does not revolve over any money at all. It's just adjusting what you're already doing to give transparency to the community of people like me and to other people. And then the third one is the buffer zone adjusted according to these pesticides based on data of the fact that pregnant mothers 2.5 miles adjust the buffer zone. I mean, they are doable. They're absolutely doable. And data is there. And again, I get you back to the precautionary principle. You will not damage anybody by doing a little bit above and beyond, except pressure from the growers. But hey, you know.
Or their potentially inability to farm within 2.5 miles.
At the risk of hurting someone's life and permanent damage? I mean, come on.
And I get your concerns. It's a fine balancing act, right? Like my
never.
office is stuck in the middle here, trying to work with all of you, with our community members, addressing your concerns, which I hear loud and clear. I'm not dismissing anything. And also balancing, agriculture in our county, which is important. It helps to support a lot of our communities through work, right? What you're asking, I'm hearing what you're saying. I think that, I don't think I can give you an answer to what or a commitment to what you're asking me to do. But I think there's a movement at the state level, right, on moving in a different direction, which I mentioned earlier with what the state is trying to do with alternatives, finding some least toxic options for growers, right? I mean, so there's a movement, so things are moving in that direction to provide some options to growers to try to look and implement and use different materials, right?
So you're saying you're not willing to do because you're waiting to see what the EPA is going to do if some things are coming up down the line?
So buffers, when it comes to buffers with pesticides, they're based on science that DPR does, and I think, fumigants are a perfect example of that. Buffer determinations for the use of those materials are done by DPR based on scientific studies and doing field analysis of those applications, right? So there's a lot of science around how they determine those buffers, and there's a lot of variables too. How many acres are going to be fumigated, the type of material, the quantity. So there's a lot of variables that go into computing what buffers should be for different materials based on that we can regulate and enforce at our level. So a lot of those things end up in regulations.
It seems so paradoxical to us that you're waiting for the science that will determine that people are being poisoned and harmed, but there is no science that's showing that they're safe. And this is the moment for you to be brave. And we're all wondering in our heads, like, how have people punished our ag commissioner for taking a stand for us in the past? We've got your back when you do it, okay? The community will have your back, and certainly there's no harm to any growers if you simply post online when the applications will be. You said that the state was hoping to do it in 2024, and we all know it is 2024. At what point, at what year would you say, you know what, I'm just going to do it? Because, you could have done it on Facebook 10 years ago or 15 years ago. The technology is there already, and we want to have the information. When you say that we report a drift or an intrusion of pesticides into our communities and off the fields to 911, we appreciate your concern for the acute effects of pesticides, but we are also concerned about the chronic effect of pesticide exposure. We know that cancers, learning disabilities, ADHD, low birth weights, neural defects, all of these things, asthma, are coming out of the pesticides. So can you at least commit to making community notifications?
Yeah, and I think to go back to your point, right, we're already doing that, right? We have our farming safely in our schools. It doesn't cover the whole county, but anybody can go in there and sign up to get notifications for any of those
What percent
schools.
of the county does it cover?
What's that?
What percent of the county does it cover?
Oh, it's gonna be just basically North County at this point.
It's a big county. We'd all like that.
Yeah, and I think, like I said earlier, right, what we started doing here was something that nobody else was doing at the time. But I think with the state system that's going to be online, hopefully this year at some point, I mean, that's going to be more inclusive to all communities across the state too. And that's definitely going to be able to go over the entire county.
Your office can lead the way if you do it now. and show the state how Monterey County is doing based on what your office.
They already know what we're doing because our office initiated that project when it first started, back 6 years ago. So they already know what we have been doing here. And I mean, to me, it makes no sense to continue to enhance a program that's going to be superseded by what the state is going to come in and put in place at some point this year.
What
I'm sorry, I know we're already past time a little bit, and I want to make sure that Juan and Olga had a chance to say something if they wanted to. Juan, did you want to add anything?
A few days ago, I heard the news in San Lucas. It's not only the pesticides, all the fertilizers too. I don't remember how long they can use the water to drink. I don't know, remember if the county food has to take bottles of water every day, or 3 or 4 bottles per week, because they can drink water.
15 years.
Yeah.
15
so
years.
It's not only the pesticides, it's all together, because the growers, they don't care what happens. They want only to make money.
Right.
And they don't care for the people. Yeah, that's I can say.
Yeah, no, and I get your concern that fertilizer, nitrogen in wells, right? That's not something my office oversees, but the water board, they're working on implementing some additional restrictions that eventually are going to limit how much nitrogen growers can use depending on the commodities that they plan to hopefully help to alleviate and address those ongoing issues.
Well,
there's something in the air and it's causing cancer, and we're here to address that. And it seems like it's a topic that people are very indifferent to. And when you're indifferent, it doesn't help. And we don't want to see you take an attitude of indifference to the people of Monterey County, because these are our people, these are our future, and that's why we're here.
Thank you, I appreciate that. No, and certainly I'm not indifferent. I live in this county, and so do my kids, and all of my staff lives here in Monterey County, as well as our growers. And certainly we're, we don't have the mindset of creating harm in any way. Our goal is to be able to make sure that, we reinforce our regulations, that we do it based on what the requirements are, making sure that our growers know what the restrictions are so that they can use those materials safely and effectively. But there are gaps, and I agree, and that's some of the things that you're bringing up here, right? So I do appreciate, having the conversation with you, and, just talking about, what the state requirements are, some of the things that we have done, and that certainly there's more work to be done. I acknowledge that.
Can you appreciate
Can
our
I just
concern
make
when...
sure Alberto gets a chance? Sorry, Alberto.
I'd just like to tell, I've been working at Monterey County at the hospital there, going close to 20 years. I work in the NICU. I deal with 500-gram babies at 25 weeks, 24 weeks. It should not be normal. And the minority, or the majority of people that are being affected are us Latinos that work those fields. These kids have brain bleeds, heart deficits. Some of them don't make it. And how do you comfort a parent that loses their newborn? You can do more. I hope you do more, because I never wish any parent, anybody, have to see what I've seen over the years. And it's not like a small majority. We have a lot of premature babies that have a lot of problems. And a lot of that is due to this. And so I just hope that we can, step up and do better. I mean, like everybody said here, you can lead the way. It's just a matter of being brave and doing it. We will have your back. We will support you. The county will support you. The people are there for you if you're willing to work with us. Please, please, do your part. Try. That's all we're asking. Do more.
wanted to add, can you understand our frustration when from 2015 to 2020, the state released no data at all? And we basically had to do an outcry across the state for the minimal data to come out in 2021. And so when we hear the word eventually, when we hear we'll wait on EPA, when we hear we'll wait on CDPR, and there's some things coming, it's frustrational because there has to be ways that we can work now, as everyone's expressed.
It's an old, tired excuse.
Yeah.
And we're tired of hearing it. And you said that you consider yourself to be in the middle of the growers of the community, but to be in the middle, you have to be being pulled both ways and being acknowledging of both sides. And I'm going to leave this meeting feeling that that's not where we're at. So again, we ask you to be more in the middle by leading the way. That would put you more in the middle. If you're waiting on EPA, if you're waiting on state regulations, you're not in the middle. You're following the line and you're standing behind it and you're hiding behind it.
Yeah. No, thank you. I appreciate your comments. I don't hide, which is why I'm here. I do appreciate, what the discussion here today. I think when it comes to leading the way, there are things we have done in the past to do that, and we continue to do to the best of our abilities. But I do appreciate you making the trip down here and having a conversation with my staff tonight today. So thank you.